Okay, welcome everyone to episode 5 of the Fit Foodie Roadshow. I am here today with Dr. Jaimie Harrow, who is a physical therapist, and he's going to help us out with tech neck, which I feel like even if you're not working from home, people are glued to their devices right now. So this is going to be really, really good. I'm really excited. Thank you so much for being with us, Jaimie.
Absolutely. Good to see you again and all of your watchers. Hi, everybody. Yeah.
It's been so long. Yeah.
It's a long time. Yeah.
So Jaimie and I actually met at a gym.
Yeah.
I'm going to call it a gym called Athletic Playground in the Berkeley area many years ago at acroyoga.
That's right.
And Jaimie was way more into it than I was. I was kind of just like a weekend warrior, but got to actually see you perform on trapeze and like do some really fun stuff back in the day. Yeah. So let me introduce Jaimie quick before we get too far into it. Jaimie got his doctorate in physical therapy after finding a movement culture in his 20s that changed his perspective on health and wellness. When not working with patients to understand how their bodies work or how to rehab or avoid injuries, Jaimie's usually upside down in a handstand, that tracks, doing partner acrobatics, climbing, hiking, or adventuring in some way. Jaimie's goal is to help people understand more about their bodies so they can learn to make their own intelligent choices. I love that. So empowering.
That's really, I think, the guiding thing for me is, especially in the US education system, I can speak at least to my own. We learn very little about how the body works. And when I went through my post-baccalaureate training to get ready for PT school and then PT school itself, the stuff I learned fundamentally changed the way I saw myself and the world around me. And it's super sad that everybody doesn't have that experience. And the info's not hard. Nothing about this information is challenging. It's just information that you need to be, provided with, but it's not rocket science. So, a little bit of education goes so long in helping people make better choices about their bodies and their lives. So that's what really drives me.
Totally. I mean, you're preaching to the choir here. That's like my experience with nutritional therapy, It's just understanding how my digestive system worked was mind-blowing. I was like, God, no wonder all these things are not working, So yeah, that's huge. So tell me a little bit about, we were talking a little bit before that you were online already a little bit, but you also have an in-person practice that you've sort of had to shift over like many people right now. What kind of clientele are you working with in your physical therapy practice now?
Sure. Yeah. So I see a broad range of patients. My bread and butter are adult athletes. So specifically, I've kind of walked into the niche of what I call alternative movers. So less traditional field sports and more rock climbers, yoga practitioners, CrossFit athletes, acrobat people, circus performers, that kind of crew. I really, really love that. That athleticism that requires a really broad range of demand from the body. And the other work that I do is more about kind of medically complex orthopedics. And so I like the balance in which we have, chronic or acute injuries that come from complex athletics, and then longer term or trauma-related medically complex physical therapy with usually an older population that I'm doing that work with.
Because they've had those issues for a long time.
Often, yeah, or just because there's increased levels of risk. As the older we are, the more time we've had to develop complex medical problems. So I like spreading stuff out. I'm a learner and I like making sure my practice is still complex so that I have that complex input into my brain to keep researching all this stuff. But yeah, by and large, my bread and butter is adult alternative movers, if I had to say.
Nice. So yeah, like the carnies that we would hang out with back in the day.
Exactly. Yeah. They're still all my best friends. Yeah.
I love that so much. That's awesome.
A lot of fun.
So, okay, so today we want to talk about tech neck, which is like a funny name that I feel like the physical therapy community kind of came up with for this posture
Totally.
that is basically like when you're looking at your phone. Thank you. Exactly. Looking at your phone, or like,
Yeah, you're on
I
your
have,
laptop. Right?
yeah, you're typing. I mean, my chiropractor calls it my empathetic lean. Like I'm leaning into a Zoom call with a
Oh,
client,
that's cool.
and all of a sudden my head is like further forward than the rest of my spine, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, tell me about like how do you deal with that when you can't actually do any physical manipulation? Like, how are you having people kind of work on that themselves right now?
Totally. I think one of the valuable things is to understand, like, okay, why is tech neck a problem? And one of the things that I like to identify is that when we have a phone, we have a laptop, we're dealing with an object that is in front of our body and below the line of our eyes, right? And
Okay.
that's really the essential problem. Whether it's a laptop that's there, like the monitor is too low and in front of us, the phone, we're not going to hold a phone up here, it's too tiring on the arm. So we're going to hold it down here so we can relax at the shoulder, but that creates a focus point down here. Yeah.
Yep.
So this is not a new problem for humans. This has been going on ever since we've had manufacturing or anything where people were doing repetitive tasks that were in front of them and a little bit below. It's a common thing throughout history, but now every single person in, you know, the modern connected world has a device that puts them in this place. And so it's just more prevalent now. And the tech neck phrasing, you know, silly wording that it is, just goes to show that there is this relationship between the most common ways this manifests and technology, right? Because of these devices that consume so much of our daily lives. So to answer your question, by recognizing that, we can, when working with patients, I can look at what are the biomechanical implications of this position? So what does this do to the musculature? And then also recognize that just because we are in this posture does not mean this posture is an inevitability. This posture is the result of the demands that we're placing on our body. And if we can alter those demands or make those demands shift into a more intelligent frame, then we can alter the biomechanical implications and solve the problem. And so we start there.
Just like being intentional about where you're putting, you know, like you talked about your monitor. Like I have this big external monitor that's like eye level, right? So like ergonomically setting up your workspace would be one thing.
Yep, that's a big piece of it.
Yeah.
And then also recognizing that for most people, the work from home, you know, shelter in place rules are certainly exacerbating the problem, but this isn't new. These are chronic problems that we all suffer from. And some of us do a better job than others about resisting that urge to let everything collapse and close down. But the issue has been there for most of us for a long time. And so the next piece, once we understand the biomechanical implications, are to recognize that we are not in these positions because we want to be. We're in these positions because the capacity of our body makes this the most bioenergetically intelligent choice we can make. Not consciously, of course, but subconsciously. So then what we need to do is just change the capacity of the body so that it wants to make the best choice biomechanically for the long haul. And that's that goes to this subtle point of recognizing that your body is probably gonna make the best choice that it can make at any given moment. And so if it's making a bad choice, we need to figure out why and adjust the capacity of the body to give it the opportunity to make a better choice.
I love this. This is exactly what I talk about metabolically with people.
Yeah,
like if you're having a craving, right? Like you got to look at why you're having the craving instead of just obsessing about the craving and denying yourself and then binging and blah, 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 right? That whole
interesting
thing. It's like, no, looking at, because the body is going to go for the path of least resistance. That's an evolutionary advantage. We love that. That's how we got to be where we are. Great. Good for us. But yeah, how do we then So is it about, I mean, I keep wanting to say the word training, right? Is it about training the body to want to do something different, or just like taking that option off the table by setting up your environment differently?
I'm actually going to say it's a third thing.
Okay.
It's all of that. It's all of that and a third thing. So
Okay.
yes, it's about certainly creating the proper environment. If your ergonomics in your desk setup are bad, you are setting yourself up for failure, because you can't, if my monitor is down here, I can't be in a nice erect posture, because I'm going to naturally have to do this, or else my eyes are going to go down.
Right.
The problem is the muscles that pull my eyes down are small little muscles. So my body isn't going to want to use those ocular muscles all day long. I'm going to want to be in about even position with my eyes. So instead, I'm going to use the larger muscles of my neck in order to adjust that. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah.
So that is super important. We have to set up our environment appropriately. We also have to recognize that, being on our phone in this position for long periods of time, it's just a bad idea. That said, I tend to think that once those two things are hopefully appropriate, once those pieces are set, then we need to deal with the fact that the body's capacity has to be adjusted so that it wants to handle things in a biomechanically optimal way. I operate a lot of times under the assumption that, like I was saying before, if we're falling into a bad posture, it's not only because of bad training, it's also because the muscles that should be keeping us in proper posture don't have the capacity to keep us there all the time. Or that the antagonistic muscles, the muscles on the opposite side of the body, are neurologically overcontracted, thus making the job of the postural muscles that much harder. So we need to adjust that relationship.
Right. And as a former personal trainer, my simplified understanding of that just comes down to we called it a length tension relationship in my education, right? So it's pretty simplified, because what you're talking about involves the nervous system and everything else too.
Totally. Yeah.
But, like biceps and triceps, when we were talking about, I did a video a couple weeks ago about glutes, and, got hamstrings and quads have to be in the proper length tension relationship. If we're sitting all the time, the hamstrings are not, because I know you talked about this in one of your videos that I saw, they're not physically shortened, but they're not extending to their fullest capacity, right? And that happens in the neck, right? Where the muscles in front are they get in the habit of being shorter than they want to be or could be, right? And then the back ones they're like working so hard. I feel that right now.
Yeah, totally. And it's actually, it's counterintuitive, but just to adjust that description a little bit, if I can.
Yeah.
What happens in tech neck when I'm here, so the object is here, right? We come forward. Now, if I start in an erect position and I just slump through the chest, this is going to happen. We don't tend to like to look down, especially if we're talking about a computer, right? So this is here. Well, I'm not going to do my computer work like this, right? That's going to be very strange. So I'm going to extend up, right? Like we were talking about before. So actually what I'm dealing with is the short, tight muscles are back here. And in the front, I'm actually long. I'm actually elongated here. What I've lost is the ability of what we call deep cervical neck flexion. And so that's the ability to not tuck chin to chest, but kind of give yourself like 5 chins, right? That's actually like, we make fun of it, but it's a really important capability that we have. And what we find is that to treat this tech neck, we need to introduce proper neuromuscular tone in the back so that we're not all crunched, right? We also need to increase capacity and contraction ability in the deep cervical neck flexors. And then we need to open up through the pectorals and activate the, let's say, rhomboids and middle traps, although there are certainly other muscles involved as well. But we need to kind of open here, activate here, open here, and activate here. And then that allows us to go into this more erect posture that we would hope to be in more of the time.
Got it. So That's so interesting, because I just had it backwards in my head, like that these ones were what was getting tight.
Most people do. Yeah, yeah.
And when I go in to get a massage, sometimes they just dig in here and then I'll get like a migraine from it because it's too much.
And the other thing to realize too is when I talk about the deep cervical neck flexors, I'm talking super deep. So a lot of times when we get manual work on our neck, or we're looking at muscles in our neck, we're focusing on two main muscles, two groups of muscles. One is going to be your sternocleidomastoid. So that's the big muscle, like this guy, you can see there, that goes like from the mastoid process all the way down to the clavicle and the sternum. So this, hence sternocleidomastoid. So this one, big muscle, can absolutely get jacked up. The other one that we focus on here are the scalenes. You've probably heard of those. So the scalenes, kind of more inside that clavicular area, although there's one in the back as well. And those muscles are absolutely involved in what I'm talking about. But when I talk about a lengthened, weak muscle in the front of the neck, I'm talking way below all those muscles, really right alongside the vertebral column. And it's a muscle called longus colli. And there are other muscles involved, but that muscle, not many people know about that muscle. It's a really deep anatomical structure. And that's one of the main muscles that does a lot of this stabilization through this deep cervical neck flexion. So when we do those interventions, that's kind of where we're targeting. You can get your longus colli massaged. It's a weird experience, and you probably haven't had it done before, but it is work that we do to kind of teach the brain, like, hey, turn this on, use this right here. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that was never on my personal training muscle.
Probably not. Yeah,
that's quizzes. Yeah,
totally,
that one wasn't one of the ones we learned. That's interesting. Okay, so it's really deep into the neck, and it basically is not turning on, is kind of what you're saying. It's like not engaging in the way that it needs to be.
To some degree, yeah, to some degree there is, because of the postural position that I'm constantly putting myself in, the brain's going, oh, I guess that muscle needs to be lengthened out. And instead of trying to fight that constant feedback that it's getting, the brain's just going to kind of turn the lights off in a room that it's not using. And so it stops keeping a base level of tone in longus colli and some of these other muscles. And they then have a hard time turning on when they need to, which is kind of, if it would be useful, that's kind of a base principle to think about with the body. Your body will reinforce these neuromuscular pathways that get used a lot. So if I put myself here a lot, every second that I'm here, I'm telling the brain, like, yeah, remember this, remember this, remember this. And then when I go, oh yeah, no, I'm supposed to be like this, maybe you can do it for a second, but that neuromuscular connection, that literal electrical link between this postural orientation and my brain, it's weak. It just doesn't have the reinforcement that this one does. And that's why this feels comfortable and more, easier to fall into. Whereas this one I have to concentrate on, and maybe it gets tiring and all of that.
Right. Cool. Okay. Yeah. What do we do with all that?
Yeah, good point. Okay, so there's a few different ways that I like working on tech neck. First, like you mentioned, we have to get our ducks in a row in terms of our ergonomics. I won't go through all the ergonomic stuff right now. There's a million charts out there. They're all pretty consistent. You want your monitor to be at eye level. You want to be in a chair that prompts an erect posture. Don't do your Zoom meetings in your lazy boy, all that kind of stuff. But besides, that kind of stuff, when we deal with the actual changes we can make to the body, there are kind of, a handful of interventions that I like to get off the bat, and they will fall into the categories we talked about before. We need to open up the pectoral region. We need to activate the posterior chain in the shoulders. That means like the back body in the shoulders. We need to kind of lengthen out some of these posterior neck muscles, and we need to activate these deep cervical neck flexors. So those four are the main areas we're going to work on. I will put the caveat here that if anybody watching this is having symptoms related to this stuff that feel really uncomfortable, if you're having a lot of pain in your neck, if you're having anything shooting down your arms or anything like that, don't try these exercises. Go and talk to somebody. These are exercises meant as like a general prescription for people that are not having severe symptoms of any kind or really any symptoms. This stuff gets complicated. So just as a little disclaimer box.
Good disclaimer. We like disclaimers around here.
Yes, absolutely. Right. So does my liability insurance. So there are a few exercises that we can do here. I'll try and demo them with the camera. We'll see what we can do here. These are our best friend, right? So we have resistance bands, right? You need all different kinds of levels here. I always use TheraBand. That's just the brand that I've used in the rehab world, but there are a million knockoffs out there that are probably just as good. But all different kind of levels are fine. So red is relatively easy, which I'll use for demo purposes, but a lot of times when we do this, we want to work our way all the way up to something really challenging, like silver is in the TheraBand world. This is the hardest band that they have. So anyway, just something to think about. If you're at a gym, not that any of us can be at gyms right now, but cable machines work really well as a substitute for resistance bands as well.
Nice.
So it's a very simple exercise, but one that I love for a whole bunch of reasons is the basic row. So I've now wrapped this band just around my table leg, and I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to assume a nice upright posture. I'm going to squeeze the shoulder blades together a little bit. It's not like sticking the chest out, but it's a little set of my rhomboids, my middle traps, some of these muscles back here between my shoulder blades. And then from here, I'm just going to row the arms back. Now this becomes an active way to squeeze my shoulder blades together and open through the chest. It's not a chest stretch. It's a posterior chain activator, but my chest gets opened in the process. So this one's really nice. I'll give you an advanced version of this one if you want it. This one I often do more for people who need more shoulder attention into like a rotator cuff program. You can complicate the row by lifting it up to 90 degrees and adding in some external rotation through the shoulders. So this becomes what we call a scarecrow or a face pull, where we actually pull straight up to the face. So this is a much more complex version. What's that?
You're a little bit internally rotated there with your hands. God, my hands look really big right here.
That's probably unintentional, yeah. So they can be here just straight out. And then as I pull up, I'm just rotating out so that my palms face away. So I'm getting that external rotation with my elbows up at about 90 degrees of abduction or so.
Okay, even just right there, I can feel it. This really needs to be opened up. Just even doing that, I'm feeling it way more in the front than the back. That's so
interesting. So you'll want to be careful with that kind of stuff, because those symptoms, we could have muscular tightness here. That's okay to work on. We could also have neurogenic tightness. So tightness through the nerves or the fascia, and that needs to be handled a lot more carefully. So you always, that's why the basic row, I do those rows all the time with a ton of force, but it's super simple, super safe. It opens everything up. You're unlikely to aggravate anything. It's a nice place to start.
Nice. And
if you need more, sorry, what?
Oh, I was just going to say, if people don't have bands, or, you know, Amazon or whoever is taking 6 weeks to ship, what can they use instead? Should they do something like with soup cans or a flask, or like a couple of these bottles?
This is a good time to kind of raid your emergency preparedness supplies and grab something like a big jug of water that you might have there. Or this one will not be heavy enough, but I have it right on hand, my medical disinfectant wipes.
Very nice.
Let's say this was relatively heavy. I could take this and turn it into a bent over row.
Right.
So instead of having an elastic band, I can be doing the same motion here, right? It's not going to be exactly the same. I don't have both arms at the same time, but it allows me to really activate everything in the posterior shoulder and open up through the chest simultaneously. So sometimes you got to get creative about it.
Totally. I honestly feel like you doing rows with a bottle of disinfectant wipes is going to be like a pandemic.
That might be a meme for something.
Oh my God.
So that's the kind of actively pull stuff. There's also the way to do a passive approach. And that would be for kind of passively opening up some of the pectorals. A lot of times we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Something like the doorway stretch is a really good way to open up the pecs. So I'll see if I can mime it here for you. my theater background will come out. But if we had a, a doorway here, I can put my arms to the side, take a step into the doorway, and just open my chest through that doorway. One of the really important things that I like to remind people here is that the pectoral muscles have fibers coming from multiple directions. So like a lot of people, yeah, exactly, yeah. So a lot of people do a pec stretch, but they only do one of them. And it's really beneficial to then open the arms up to another position and open up through that doorway in another fiber orientation. That's way more effective. So you can do them kind of in this whole range. And what I usually recommend for stretching, for what it's worth, is you enter the stretch, don't get to a crazy intense level. You want to be at like, you make it up like a 3 out of 10, something that's pleasantly uncomfortable, right? You hang out for about 30 to 60 seconds, breathing the whole time, letting everything release as you go through it. There's a neurophysiologic change that happens between 30 and 60 seconds that allows the brain to go, oh, okay, maybe this is a new set point. Maybe this is where I can hold my base level tone instead of this. So you need to hold it. And then I'd go through it a few times, kind of open yourself up a little bit.
Like a few sets, basically? Or
yeah. I would do maybe 3 positions of the arms for about 30 seconds each and go through that once or twice.
Nice.
Yeah.
Easy. Most of us have doorways, so
absolutely.
That's pretty
Most of us have doorways, and what I like to do for myself as I'm in my home, anytime I walk to the bathroom, I have to go through a doorway, I do a stretch every time I do it. Good. So 4 or 5 times throughout the day, I get to stretch my pecs out. It's worked out pretty well.
Brilliant.
So as far as the neck goes, we can apply the same principles. And what we need to do is turn on the muscles here, and we need to stretch out the muscles here. Neck stretches that you can do, there's, a million, but let me just grab something right here. There are all kinds of interventions that we can use to stretch out the muscles on the side or back of our neck. One of the things I like to do is use a pretty strong band, okay? And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna step on it, and I'm gonna bring it up and over my shoulder and anchor it here really close to my neck, okay? So I'm gonna hold it with this other hand here, so it's pulling down, and what this is doing is pinning some of these muscles, my traps, maybe my levator scapula coming up from the back, maybe my scalenes, but it's pulling it down, and then I'm going to let my head tilt to the side and stretch out like this. Then we rotate 45 degrees and we do the same stretch. So this, for me, I could stay here all day. This feels so nice, stretching out through the back of my neck in this kind of right side quadrant area.
Yeah. And you have the band on the inside of your collarbone medial.
Yeah, it's kind of going through the medial third, that inside third of the collarbone. It doesn't really matter. The idea is I want something pushing down here.
Pressure on those muscles, yeah.
Yeah, another option for this that's really quite yummy is if I'm in my chair, I'm gonna do the same thing, but I'm gonna grab onto the chair, and then I do that same pull away, and I pull with the arm. I'm pulling the shoulder down with the arm.
Nice.
And I can do that same stretch. It does something somewhat similar. And
yeah, a little more active, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, same, 30 seconds, 30 to 60 seconds kind of a thing works really well. Now I want to do the other side. I'm uneven.
Right.
It works really well. And we'll just start to loosen up some of those muscles that are holding us up like this, right?
Nice.
Now, like we were saying, the 4th piece is we need to activate those deep cervical neck flexors. I'll show you 2 ways to do that, because a lot of times people really need some help here. This one you can do in your chair if you have a high back chair, or against a wall. But what you do is you grab some kind of a pillow. You're gonna put it behind your head, and let's see if I can go horizontal here so you can see me. And then, so you can see the pillow is pushing me out, right? It's kind of putting me in a tech neck position almost, right? Because I'm being tilted forward, but then I'm scooping my neck up like this. So what I want to do is push my chin towards the back of the chair. and then come out. It's subtle. It doesn't need to be very much, but I'm squeezing my head kind of into this like almost military position, right? And then coming out of it. My goal is to make some chins. And as I do this, the first time that people start doing this, this might get fatiguing. This might actually be like, whoa, I'm actually getting kind of tired as I do this. Now, here's the really important part. If you want to be really technical about it, I'll pull in so you can see my neck. If I do this chin tuck wrong, do you see these muscles pop out?
Yes.
That's my sternocleidomastoid. I don't want that to happen. That means that my brain is going to be trying to use these big neck flexors as opposed to the deep neck flexors. What we do is monitor those muscles. Take a hand, put them right here on the front of the neck, and then perform the exercise and see if you can do it without these turning on.
Oh, that's totally harder.
Yeah, much harder. So here, now I'm doing the motion and these are nice and soft. If I do it wrong, let's see if I can, yeah, now they're popping out. Yeah, there you go. So that's a nice way to do it against something. The pillow, if you get the right kind of pillow, it gives some like tactile feedback, right? It's like a pad you're pushing into, right? I'll show you one more. I'm gonna pop us down onto the ground here.
This is so great, Jaimie. Oh my God.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Bring my mic with me. Okay, so if we pop down onto the ground here, I like to do one that allows us to take advantage of a force we all get to interact with all the time that can be our resistance band, and that's gravity, right? So we can just use the weight of our head as a resistance force. And what we do is we start here, just face down, and I'm going to, actually I'll go at an angle so you can see, and I'm gonna just lift my head and my chest against gravity. So from here, I'm gonna pull up. And by doing this, I get that deep cervical neck flexion, I get elongation through the back of the neck, and I also get a little bit of thoracic mobilization, which is just kind of a nice cherry on top. So I'm here, hold, and then come back down. The length of time you hold is going to be dependent on what your capacity is going into the motion, right? If you're the worst tech neck person ever, 2 seconds might be too much. And you might need to do just repetitions until you can build for time.
Yeah.
One thing to keep in mind here is that we are dealing with a postural issue. So our goal is not like repetitions with 30 or 40 pounds on our head to give us resistance. Our goal is endurance. This is definitely an endurance focused activity. I'd rather go for time than for additional load. Nice. Yeah. Make sense?
Great. Yeah. And I think even if, you know, you can incorporate that kind of a move or that kind of a neck posture into, if you're doing yoga at home right now, you know, a lot of people will go right into cobra or upward dog, and they're doing the exact same thing with their neck, right? Where they're jutting their chin out and having that same posture as if they were sitting looking at a phone in front of them.
Yeah, just a lot of cervical extension.
Yes.
As they do that, yeah. And so this is like, sorry, just to add, like, there's nothing wrong with cervical extension.
No, it's a valid range of movement. Yeah.
Totally, totally. It's just about recognizing how often are we in that position throughout the day.
Yeah, and if you can have just those little moments of retraining that brain pattern, right? To go, oh, maybe when I'm, you know, here, I can make some chins. This is literally, I'm going to do this all day now. I'm like, how can I not get these to kick in?
Well, so you know the PT in me is going to tell you not to do it all day, right? This
I know.
Is how people get in trouble,
I'm really not going to do it all day.
Right, I know. We get like a small little postural exercise to work on insufficient muscles, and then we're like, oh, that's really fun. I'm going to do that 600 times, and then we create all kinds of problems, right? we need a I often call it a slow, progressive onset of load, so that we don't overwhelm these tiny, unfortunate cervical neck flexors that have been deeply neglected for a long time. We need to train them to turn on more.
Right. Okay, promise not to do it all day. I'll do a little bit every day. How about that?
Perfect.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
No, it's really fascinating.
And that's really, So sorry.
I worked for a chiropractic neurologist at some point, and I was like the trainer in charge of rehab. And that was one of the cues, right? Was make a double chin that we would work with people on. But I never learned that part of like, notice if these muscles are actually kicking in and then just making everything worse. So that was
if people are interested in learning a little bit more about that topic, the phrase to Google, although be careful with that, but the phrase to Google is deep cervical neck flexion. That's the kind of physiologic buzzword around this phenomena. And there's a ton of research out there about it. There's in PT world, we often do, we often try to work with what we call external cueing, which is how can somebody get external feedback that they're doing something correctly, as opposed to internal cueing, which is more about like, does it feel right? Or does it look like this is going in the right direction? That can be very tricky and it can be hard to cue into, but an external cue, like, you know, if you have a laser attached to your thigh and you're trying to track your knee, you just watch the laser and does it go on the line? That kind of stuff is really helpful. And we have these devices where people will lay on their back and they'll do this deep cervical neck flexion with an air bladder connected to a pressure sensor, and they can see the pressure change as they do the neck flexion. And the goal becomes to hit a certain amount of pressure and hold it and hold it. And is it wavering? Is it dropping? No, hold it a little bit more and then release. Now that's too complicated of a setup, but just so people can get a sense, like this is really important stuff that we do a lot of work with in the PT world, and other fields do this as well. You know, chiros do this work, and it's really quite valuable, and there's a lot of info about it.
Cool. All right. Yeah. That's really exciting. Glad that I don't have anyone measuring how much pressure I'm putting on it right now, but maybe I'll work.
Absolutely. Yeah. It'd be deeply embarrassing for all of us right now. Yeah.
I know. Oh my God.
And the other thing too, is just to realize that, you know, these things aren't a problem until they're all of a sudden a serious problem, right? Like there's nothing wrong with tech neck. There is a problem with the biomechanical implications of creating those patterns and what it can do to you down the road. It can lead to impingement of various structures. It can lead to degeneration of certain joints. It can lead to all kinds of bad stuff, as can many other things that we do with our bodies. But because of that, we want to try to address this stuff as early as we can and start working on it before it's a problem. I'd rather not see somebody for extensive cervical radiculopathy running down the arms if in 6 months or a year prior, we can put in a few interventions to change their posture and have that radiculopathy never manifest. So that's kind of the goal. It's, the best laid interventions happen when people don't really notice the difference because they didn't have a symptom to correct. And that's when I feel like really happy when we can do that.
Nice. Nice. And not that anyone should be doing anything specific with their pandemic time. We were talking about this before, like stop shaming people for eating ice cream, everyone. But it can be for some people who are privileged enough to have the time to focus on it. It can be a really great time to focus on things like this and be like, what do I need to do to prevent something like this happening later on down the line? And a lot of us see our parents with terrible, degeneration in their spine, arthritis, lots of health issues. And it's a scary time right now to have older aging parents and, older relatives. And so I think for some people, it can be a little bit of a wake up call to go, okay, what do I need to do to, have a different path? And so it's a really good topic for sure.
It's also nice to realize that implementing some interventions about this stuff is really fast. You can do a program based on the 4 exercises that I just demoed or any variation thereof that you like in probably 3 or 4 minutes, right? So 3 or 4 minutes a day is going to go a long way towards correcting some of these patterns.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of hard to argue with the risk reward ratio of something of so small an investment.
Totally.
That said, I get it. It's really hard to do rehab or do prehab work. People struggle with this all the time. I have tons of empathy for people that struggle with it. I do myself. But if you can see the end possibility, if you can lock on to why you're doing it, a lot of times it can help you get through that hump of getting going.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for just spending the time with us today.
Oh, absolutely.
And
So fun.
I'm so excited to put this out there in the world and help people with this. And you are accepting new patients right now, right? So
absolutely, yeah. So I'm
people
doing a lot
don't
of,
have to be in California to work with you, which is super exciting.
yeah. So just to explain that a little bit more, yeah. If you're in California, you can contact me. Maybe you can put in a description my
I'll put all your
website or
contact
email.
info.
Perfect. Yeah. It's info@smartmovementpt.com is my direct email, or www.smartmovementpt.com. And I'm doing a lot of virtual physical therapy right now that's been really, really wonderful for folks. If you're in California, we can work on your injuries, no questions asked, and we can just jump straight into what you want to work with. If you're outside California, we're operating under what we call wellness, which basically just means we can talk about all the same stuff, just in slightly more general, in a slightly more general way. We're talking about the injury patterns, the physiology, the biomechanics, not technically dealing with your injury specifically, but there is tons that we can do even in that vein. So feel free to reach out. The consultations are super fun, and we should, get started as soon as we can.
Nice. I love it. Awesome. I'll definitely put all that in the show notes, and
great.
We will, get this going out there in the world. I'm so
excellent.
excited.
Well, thanks for everything that you're doing for your community too. The information you're putting out there is super important, and I look forward to hearing from some of your community.
Right on. All right. Thanks so much, Jaimie. I'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Talk to you again soon. Okay. Cheers.